Major General Orde Charles Wingate DSO and AMP 2 Bars was a senior British Army officer, known for his creation of the Chindit deep penetration missions in Japanese-held territory during the Burma campaign of World War II. Wingate was an exponent of unconventional military thinking and the value of surprise tactics. Assigned to Mandatory Palestine, he became a supporter of Zionism, and set up a joint British-Jewish counter-insurgency unit, under the patronage of the area commander Archibald Wavell. Wingate was given increasing latitude to put his ideas into practice during World War II. He created units in Abyssinia and Burma, at a time when Britain was in need of morale-boosting generalship. Wingate attracted British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's attention with a self-reliant aggressive philosophy of war, and was given resources to stage a large-scale operation. The last Chindit campaign may have determined the outcome of the Battle of Kohima, although the offensive into India by the Japanese may have occurred because Wingate's first operation had demonstrated the possibility of moving through the jungle. In practice, both Japanese and British forces suffered severe supply problems and malnutrition. Wingate was killed in an aircraft accident late in the war. A continuing controversy over the Chindits has centered around the casualty rate the force suffered, especially from disease. Wingate believed that resistance to infection could be improved by inculcating a tough mental attitude, but medical officers considered his methods unsuited to a tropical environment. Childhood and education. Wingate was born on 26 February 1903, in Nainital, near Almora, in Kumaon, India, to a military family. His father had become a committed member of the Plymouth Brethren early in his army career in India, and at the age of 46 married the oldest daughter of a family who were also Plymouth Brethren, after wooing her for 20 years. His father retired from the army 2 years after Wingate was born. Most of Wingate's childhood was spent in England. For the first 12 years of his life, he socialized primarily with his siblings. The 7 Wingate children received a typical Christian education for the era. Time was set aside each day for studying and memorizing the scriptures. In 1916, his family moved to Godalming, where Wingate attended Charterhouse School as a day boy. He did not board at the school, nor did he participate in the activities of a public school education. Instead, Wingate was kept busy at home by his parents, who encouraged their children to tackle challenging projects which fostered independent thought, initiative and self-reliance. Early Army career. After 4 years, Wingate left Charterhouse, and in 1921 he was accepted at the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich, the Royal Artillery's Officers' Training School. For committing a minor offence against the rules, a first-year student would be subjected to a ragging ritual named running. This ritual consisted of the first year being stripped and forced to run a gauntlet of senior students, all of whom wielded a knotted towel which was used to hit the accused on his journey along the line. On reaching the end, the first year would then be thrown into an icy cold cistern of water. When it came time for Wingate to run the gauntlet, for allegedly having returned a horse to the stables too late, he walked up to the senior student at the head of the gauntlet, stared at him and dared him to strike. The senior refused. Wingate moved to the next senior and did the same. He too refused. In turn, each senior declined to strike. Coming to the end of the line, Wingate walked to the cistern and dived straight into the icy cold water. In 1923, Wingate received his Royal Artillery Officer's Commission and was posted to the 5th Medium Brigade at Larkhill on Salisbury Plain. During this period he was able to exercise his great great interest in horse riding, gaining a reputation for his skill in point-to-point races and fox hunting, particularly for finding suitable places to cross rivers, which earned him the nickname Otter. It was difficult for a 1920s army officer to live on his pay, and Wingate, living life to the full, also gained a reputation as a late payer of his bills. He was promoted lieutenant on the 29th of August 1925. In 1926, because of his prowess in riding, Wingate was posted to the military school of equitation where he excelled, much to the chagrin of the majority of the cavalry officers at the center who found him insufferable. He frequently challenged the instructors as a demonstration of his rebellious nature. Sudan, 1928–1933. Wingate's father's cousin Rex, Sir Reginald Wingate, a retired army general who had been Governor-General of the Sudan between 1899 and 1916 and High Commissioner of Egypt from 1917 to 1919, had a considerable influence on Wingate's career. He gave him a positive interest in Middle East affairs and in Arabic. As a result, Wingate applied to take a course in Arabic at the School of Oriental Studies in London and passed out of the course, which lasted from October 1926 to March 1927, with a mark of 85/100. In June 1927, with cousin Rex's encouragement, Wingate obtained 6 months' leave in order to mount an expedition in the Sudan. Rex had suggested that he travel via Cairo and then try to obtain secondment to the Sudan Defense Force. Sending his luggage ahead of him, Wingate set off in September 1927 by bicycle, traveling first through France and Germany before making his way to Genoa via Czechoslovakia, Austria and Yugoslavia. From Genoa he took a boat to Egypt. From Cairo he traveled to Khartoum. In April 1928 his application to transfer to the Sudan Defense Force came through and he was posted to the East Arab Corps, serving in the area of Rosas and Galabat on the borders of Ethiopia, where the SDF patrolled to catch slave traders and ivory poachers. He changed the method of regular patrolling to ambushes. In March 1930 Wingate was given command of a company of 300 soldiers with the local rank of Bimbashi. He was never happier than when in the bush with his unit, but when at HQ in Khartoum he antagonized the other officers with his aggressive and argumentative personality. He was granted the local rank of captain in the regular army on the 16th of April 1930. At the end of his tour, Wingate mounted a short expedition into the Libyan desert to investigate the lost army of Cambyses, mentioned in the writings of Herodotus, and to search from the lost oasis of Zersura, supported by equipment from the Royal Geographical Society and the Sudan Survey Department. The expedition set off in January 1933. Although they did not find the oasis, Wingate saw the expedition as an opportunity to test his endurance in a very harsh physical environment, and also his organizational and leadership abilities. He concluded his service in the Sudan on the 2nd of April 1933. Returned to the UK, 1933 to 1936. On his return to the UK in 1933, Wingate was posted to Bulford on Salisbury Plain and was heavily involved in retraining, as British artillery units were being mechanized. On the sea voyage from Egypt he met Lorna Moncrief Patterson, who was 16 years old and travelling with her mother. They were married 2 years later, on the 24th of January 1935. For the 13th of January 1935, Wingate was seconded to the Territorial Army as the adjutant of the 71st Field Brigade, a Territorial Army unit of the Royal Artillery, with the temporary rank of captain. He was promoted to the substantive rank of captain on 16 May 1936, and vacated his appointment as adjutant on 8 September. Palestine and the Special Night Squads. In September 1936, Wingate was assigned to a staff officer position in the British Mandate of Palestine, and became an intelligence officer. From his arrival he saw the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine as being a religious duty, and immediately put himself into absolute alliance with Jewish political leaders. Palestinian Arab guerrillas had at the time of his arrival begun a campaign of attacks against both British Mandate officials and Jewish communities. Wingate became politically involved with a number of Zionist leaders, and became an ardent Zionist himself. He always returned to Kibbutz En-Harid, because he felt familiar with the biblical judge Gideon, who fought in this area, and used it himself as a military base. He formulated the idea of raising small assault units of British-led Jewish commandos armed with grenades and light infantry small arms to combat the Arab revolt. Wingate took his idea personally to Archibald Wavell, who was then the commander of British forces in Palestine. After Wavell gave his permission, Wingate convinced the Zionist Jewish Agency and the leadership of Haganah, the Jewish armed group. In June 1938, the new British commander, General Yoninah, gave his permission to create the Special Night Squads, armed groups formed of British and Haganah volunteers. The Jewish Agency helped pay salaries and other costs of the Haganah personnel. Wingate trained, commanded and accompanied them on the patrols. The units frequently ambushed Arab saboteurs who attacked oil pipelines of the Iraq Petroleum Company, raiding border villages the attackers had used as bases. In these raids, Wingate's men sometimes imposed severe collective punishments on the villages, which were criticized by Zionist leaders as well as Wingate's British superiors. Wingate disliked Arabs, once shouting at Haganah fighters after a June 1938 attack on a village on the border between Mandatory Palestine and Lebanon, "I think you are all totally ignorant in your Ramat Yochanan, since you do not even know the elementary use of bayonets when attacking dirty Arabs. How can you put your left foot in front?" But the brutal tactics proved effective in quelling the uprising, and Wingate was awarded the DSO in 1938. However, his deepening direct political involvement with the Zionist cause and an incident where he spoke publicly in favor of the formation of a Jewish state during his leave in Britain, caused his superiors in Palestine to remove him from command. He was so deeply associated with political causes in Palestine that his superiors considered him compromised as an intelligence officer in the country. He was promoting his own agenda rather than that of the army of the government. In May 1939 he was transferred to Britain. Wingate became a hero of the Yishuv, and was loved by leaders such as Zvi Brenner and Moshe Dayan, who had trained under him, and who claimed that Wingate had taught us everything we know. Wingate's political attitudes towards Zionism were heavily influenced by his Plymouth Brethren religious views and belief in certain eschatological doctrines, Ethiopia and the Gideon force. At the outbreak of World War II, Wingate was the commander of an anti-aircraft unit in Britain. He repeatedly made proposals to the army and government for the creation of a Jewish army in Palestine which would rule over the area and its Arab population in the name of the British. Eventually his friend Wavell, by this time Commander-in-Chief of Middle East Command which was based in Cairo, invited him to Sudan to begin operations operations against Italian occupation forces in Ethiopia. Under William Platt, the British commander in Sudan, he created the Gideon Force, a guerrilla force composed of British, Sudanese and Ethiopian soldiers. The force was named after the biblical judge Gideon, who defeated a large force with a tiny band. Wingate invited a number of veterans of the Haganah SNS to join him. With the blessing of the Emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, the group began to operate in February 1941. Wingate was temporarily promoted lieutenant colonel and put in command. He again insisted on leading from the front and accompanied his troops. The Gideon Force, with the aid of local resistance fighters, harassed Italian forts and the supply lines while the regular army took on the main forces of the Italian army. The small Gideon force of no more than 1,700 men took the surrender of about 20,000 Italians toward the end of the campaign. At the end of the fighting, Wingate and the men of the Gideon Force linked with the force of Lt. Gen. Alan Cunningham, which had advanced from Kenya in the south and accompanied the Emperor in his triumphant return to Addis Ababa in May. Wingate was mentioned in dispatches in April 1941 and was awarded a second DSO in December. With the end of the East African Campaign on the 4th of June 1941, Wingate was removed from command of the now dismantled Gideon Force and his rank reduced to that of Major. During the campaign he was irritated that British authorities ignored his request for decorations for his men and obstructed his efforts to obtain back pay and other compensation for them. He left for Cairo and wrote an official report which was extremely critical of his commanders, fellow officers, government officials and many others. Wingate was also angry that his efforts had not been praised by authorities, and that he had been forced to leave Abyssinia without having said farewell to Emperor Selassie. Wingate was most concerned about British attempts to stifle Ethiopian freedom, writing that attempts to raise future rebellions amongst populations must be honest ones and should appeal to justice. Soon after, he contracted malaria. He sought treatment from a local doctor instead of army medical staff because he was afraid that the illness would give his detractors a further excuse to undermine him. This doctor gave him a large supply of the drug atabrine, which can produce depression as a side effect if taken in high dosages. Already depressed by the official response to his Abyssinian command, and sick with malaria, Wingate attempted suicide by stabbing himself in the neck. Only prompt action by another officer saved him. Wingate was sent to Britain to recuperate. A highly edited version of his report was passed through Wingate's political supporters in London to Winston Churchill. Consequent to this, Leo Amery, the Secretary of State for India, contacted Wavell, now Commander-in-Chief in India commanding the Southeast Asian Theatre, to inquire if there were any chance of employing Wingate in the Far East. On the 27th of February 1942, Wingate, far from pleased with his posting as a supernumerary major without staff grading, left Britain for Rangoon.